If you ask most people what matters most for building wealth through investing, almost everyone says the same thing: picking the right stocks, finding the next big winner, getting in early on the company that is about to explode. And almost everyone is wrong about what actually drives long-term financial outcomes, including for people who have spent years actively trying to pick winning investments. Research on long-term investor outcomes consistently shows that stock selection, the specific individual investments chosen, explains a surprisingly small percentage of the difference between people who build significant wealth and people who do not. The decisions that actually matter most are far less exciting, rarely discussed in popular financial media, and almost never the subject of a viral video promising the next big stock pick. But they are the decisions that determine the vast majority of your financial outcome over a lifetime. Today, we are going through those decisions, the ones that matter more than picking stocks, supported by the research and the math behind why they matter so much. This is, in many ways, the most important video in this entire collection, because it ties together everything we have covered and points directly at where your attention and energy should actually go. Let's get into it. Decision 1. How much you save, not what you invest in. The single most influential factor in most people's long-term wealth is not their investment selection. It is their savings rate, the percentage of income they consistently direct toward investments in the first place. This is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of mathematics that becomes obvious once you compare the relative impact of savings rate versus investment performance. Consider two investors. The first saves 10% of a $60,000 income and earns an average 12% annual return through skillful stock picking, a genuinely exceptional, above-market performance that very few investors achieve consistently. The second saves 25% of the same $60,000 and earns a more typical 9% average return through simple index fund investing. Over 30 years, the second investor, with the lower, more ordinary return but the much higher savings rate, ends up with significantly more wealth than the first investor, despite the first investor's superior investment performance. The amount going in is simply a more powerful lever than the return on what goes in, particularly in the early and middle years of a wealth-building journey. This is why financial advisors and researchers who study wealth accumulation consistently emphasize savings rate over investment selection when discussing what actually drives outcomes. A person who increases their savings rate from 10% to 20% of income has made a decision that will likely have more impact on their eventual net worth than years of trying to identify which specific stocks will outperform the market. The savings rate decision is also one you have almost complete control over, while investment outperformance is notoriously difficult to achieve consistently.
Decision 2. Starting early, not picking perfectly. We have covered this extensively in other videos, but in the context of what matters more than stock picking, it deserves to be stated directly. When you start investing matters more than what you invest in, assuming a reasonably diversified approach in both cases. A person who starts investing in a simple, unremarkable S&P 500 index fund at age 25 will, in the overwhelming majority of scenarios, end up with significantly more wealth than a person who waits until age 35 to start investing, even if that second person manages to consistently pick investments that outperform the index by a meaningful margin. The 10 years of additional compound growth available to the early starter is simply very difficult to overcome through investment selection skill alone, particularly because outperforming the market consistently over long periods is something the vast majority of even professional investors fail to do. This means that the decision to start investing now with whatever reasonably sensible investment you have access to is generally more impactful than spending months or years researching and waiting for the perfect investment opportunity before beginning. The cost of the search for the perfect investment is usually delayed compounding, and delayed compounding is one of the most expensive costs in all of personal finance. Decision 3. Avoiding high-interest debt, not chasing high returns. As we have discussed throughout this collection, the mathematics of avoiding high-interest debt frequently outweighs the mathematics of seeking high investment returns, and this is a decision that deserves to be ranked above stock picking in terms of overall financial impact. A guaranteed 22% cost from carrying a credit card balance is a larger and more certain force on your financial position than the uncertain pursuit of a 12% or 15% return through skillful investing. Eliminating high-interest debt is in effect securing a guaranteed return that exceeds almost anything achievable through stock selection, with none of the risk or uncertainty involved in trying to identify winning investments. The decision to prioritize debt elimination over investment return chasing is, for most people carrying high-interest debt, mathematically more impactful than any stock-picking strategy could be. This decision also has a compounding quality of its own. Money freed from debt service after a balance is eliminated can then be redirected to investing, creating a double benefit: the elimination of a guaranteed negative compounding force and the initiation of a positive one. Very few individual stock picks can match the combined impact of this single financial decision.
Decision 4. Keeping costs and fees low, not chasing performance. We have covered the mathematics of fees in earlier videos, but the decision to minimize investment costs deserves to be highlighted specifically as more impactful than stock selection, because the evidence on this point is remarkably consistent and remarkably underappreciated. Decades of research comparing low-cost index investing to actively managed higher-fee investment approaches consistently shows that the majority of actively managed funds explicitly designed around the skill of picking winning investments, fail to outperform low-cost index alternatives over long periods after accounting for their higher fees. This means that the decision to choose low-cost investment vehicles is, on average, more likely to improve your outcome than attempting to identify which actively managed fund or which individual stocks will outperform the market. The decision to minimize fees is also one of the few financial decisions where you have complete certainty about the outcome at the time you make it. You know with certainty that a 0.03% expense ratio costs less than a 1% expense ratio. You do not know with any certainty which stock or which fund manager will outperform over the next 20 years. Making decisions based on certain known costs rather than uncertain, hoped-for outperformance is a more reliable foundation for long-term financial planning. If this reframing of what actually matters in investing is landing for you, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. New content every week, always grounded in research and real numbers, always designed to help you focus your energy where it actually makes a difference. Now let's get into the remaining decisions. Decision 5. Staying invested through volatility rather than attempting to sell before declines and buy back in before recoveries. The decision to remain invested through market downturns rather than attempting to sell before declines and buy back in before recoveries has a dramatically larger impact on long-term outcomes than the specific investments chosen, and the research on this point is extensive and consistent. Studies on market timing consistently find that missing even a small number of the market's best days, which frequently occur in close proximity to its worst days during periods of high volatility, dramatically reduces long-term returns. An investor who remained fully invested in the S&P 500 over a multi-decade period historically achieved returns several times higher than an investor with an identical portfolio who missed even the 10 best trading days during that same period by attempting to time their entries and exits. The behavioral decision to stay invested through volatility, rather than the analytical decision of which specific stocks to hold, is what separates most successful long-term investors from most unsuccessful ones.
This is fundamentally a decision about behavior and discipline rather than analysis or stock selection. It requires no special skill at identifying undervalued companies or predicting market movements. It requires only the discipline to maintain a sound, diversified investment position through the inevitable periods of fear and uncertainty that occur regularly throughout any multi-decade investing journey. This single behavioral decision likely has more impact on most people's investment outcomes than every stock pick they will ever make combined.
Decision 6. Tax-advantaged account usage, not tax-inefficient trading. The decision of which type of account to use for your investments and the order in which you fill different account types frequently has a larger impact on your after-tax wealth than the specific investments held within those accounts. Maximizing contributions to tax-advantaged accounts like a Roth IRA or 401k before investing in a regular taxable brokerage account can mean the difference between paying zero tax on decades of investment growth versus paying capital gains tax on that same growth. For someone in a meaningful tax bracket, this single account selection decision can be worth tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars over a multi-decade investing career, an impact that frequently exceeds what could realistically be gained through superior stock selection within either account type. This decision also interacts with employer matching where applicable. The decision to contribute enough to a workplace retirement account to capture the full employer match represents a guaranteed and immediate return that no stock selection strategy could reliably replicate. Account selection and contribution sequencing are, in effect, structural decisions made once that continue paying dividends, quite literally, for decades, regardless of which specific investments are held within the accounts. Decision 7. Insurance and risk management, not maximizing returns. A decision that rarely gets discussed alongside investing but that has an enormous impact on long-term financial outcomes is appropriate insurance coverage and risk management, ensuring that a single catastrophic event cannot undo years or decades of careful financial progress. An investment portfolio that has grown for 15 years through disciplined saving and sound asset allocation can be partially or entirely depleted by a single uninsured medical event, a lawsuit without adequate liability coverage, or a disability that eliminates income without adequate income protection insurance. No amount of skillful stock picking protects against these risks, only appropriate insurance does. The decision to maintain adequate health insurance, appropriate liability coverage, and income protection where relevant is a foundational risk management decision that protects the wealth-building process itself, regardless of how well the underlying investments perform. This decision is rarely framed as part of investing, but it functions as one of the most important defensive decisions in any long-term financial plan. The goal of investing is not just to build wealth, but to ensure that wealth once built is not erased by a single unprotected risk. This decision matters more than stock selection, precisely because it determines whether the gains from good stock selection are ever allowed to compound undisturbed over the necessary multi-decade timeline. Decision 8. Your own behavior, not the market's behavior. The final and perhaps most encompassing decision is the one that determines whether every other good decision on this list is actually followed through on consistently. Your own behavioral discipline independent of what the market, the economy, or anyone else is doing. Research from financial services firms that track actual investor returns compared to the returns of the funds they were invested in consistently finds a phenomenon called the behavior gap. The difference between the returns an investment vehicle produced and the returns actual investors in that vehicle achieved due to poorly timed buying and selling driven by emotion rather than strategy. This gap is frequently several percentage points annually, which compounds into an enormous difference over decades, often larger than the difference between a mediocre and an excellent specific investment choice. This means that for most people, the most impactful financial decision available to them is not which investment to choose, but the decision to behave consistently and unemotionally with whatever sound, diversified investment strategy they have chosen.
Discipline, patience, and consistency are not exciting topics. They do not make for compelling video titles promising the next winning stock. But the evidence is overwhelming that they matter more for most people's actual financial outcomes than any specific investment selection ever could. 8 decisions that matter more than picking stocks. How much you save, which is mathematically a more powerful lever than investment performance for most people. Starting early rather than waiting for the perfect investment, since lost compounding time is rarely recoverable through selection skill. Avoiding high-interest debt, which represents a more certain and more powerful force than chasing high investment returns. Keeping costs and fees low, which provides a known and certain benefit compared to uncertain attempts at outperformance. Staying invested through volatility rather than attempting to time entries and exits. Using tax-advantaged accounts correctly, which can be worth more over decades than superior stock selection. Maintaining appropriate insurance and risk management to protect the wealth-building process itself, and finally, maintaining behavioral discipline and consistency, which research consistently shows matters more than the specific investment vehicle chosen. None of these decisions require predicting which company will be the next great success story. None of them require specialized analytical skill that most professional fund managers themselves struggle to consistently demonstrate. They require something far more achievable: consistent, disciplined, informed decision-making across a relatively small number of structural choices that, once made correctly, continue compounding in your favor for decades with very little ongoing effort required. This brings together everything covered throughout this entire collection of videos: understanding how money actually works, recognizing the behavioral patterns that keep people stuck, adopting the habits and mindsets of people who build real wealth, avoiding the decade-specific mistakes that derail financial progress, understanding the true cost of lifestyle inflation and the hidden costs of inflation itself, and now, finally, understanding clearly where your attention and effort are most powerfully spent. The resources in the description below bring together books, tools, and guides referenced throughout this series that go deeper on every one of these decisions. If you have found this content valuable, those resources are genuinely worth your continued attention. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 8 decisions you are going to focus on first. I read every single comment, and I would love to hear where you are in your own financial journey. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel, please do that now. There is always more practical, honest financial content on the way.